Welcome back to Unhinged Curiosity. Now, you may have seen if you're watching the podcast today that I'm in a different location. I'm actually back in the UK, and we are kindly being hosted by Liverpool Podcast Studios. So for anyone who followed my previous podcast, you may remember we did shoot a couple of episodes here. So it's a little bit of nostalgia to be back here and back in the UK. But one of the things I always kind of reminisce on when I leave Australia, I feel like I learn a lesson every single time I'm over there and there's a period to reflect on. And I think what I was thinking about this time when I was on the way back to the airport was that time isn't a healer. It's what you do in that time that really moves the needle forward. Because if you just continue to do the same thing, then nothing really changes. And I think if you start to really lean into that and doing different things and changing your action plan, then one day, not only will you feel better, but you will look better and be better. So that was a lesson that I really kind of reflected on when I was on my long 30-hour travel back to the UK again. And one of the other things I quickly just wanted to get in there before we get into today's episode is we have finally launched another men's event. So Carry the Weight Club, a men's mental health event that is going to be coming up on the 6th of September. So I'll leave that in the description notes wherever you are watching or listening to today's podcast. That event is going to be a little bit different to the other one. So we're taking it away from the city and we're taking it into nature. We're going to be doing a 10K trail run and some cold water exposure. So that'll be on the 6th. Again, I'll leave the Eventbrite page. It's all going to be in aid of men's mental health, raising some money and raising some awareness. So today's episode, this is going to be our first Q&A of the new podcast, which I'm looking forward to. I did and have been leaving the email address for you guys to be able to just connect with me. The big thing that I want to get across with this podcast is that it's here to be a voice in your corner, and I wanted it to be as interactive with you as possible. So we do have the email address set up, and there's been some questions that have popped in over the last couple of weeks that I've just been collecting and waiting to do a Q&A episode with. So without further ado, we'll dive into a couple of these questions. But if you do have any questions for future episodes, then please just feel free to pop those over to ben@unhingedcuriosity.com. So first question is from Clara. I have a question for you. How do I tell my parents that I'm going to run my first ultra marathon? My parents and actually my whole family don't support me much in sport and think I'm just hurting myself. That's why I've been training secretly all summer while they're at work. But there's not much time left before the race, and I'm afraid we'll argue and that it will ruin my excitement and joy. And then I'll feel guilty during the ultra. So, Clara, I've said this before, but people around you don't want you to be the best version of yourself. They want you to be the best version of you that best serves them. And sometimes when that's friends and family, that's a difficult scenario to digest. And that's often because when you are doing something that's out of the norm, out of the ordinary, maybe even extraordinary, it's going to shine a light onto them. And it's going to make them reflect on their life and maybe the things that they aren't doing or aren't achieving that they really wanted to. So essentially what you're going to do is act as a mirror that is going to make them self-reflect on themselves. And when people do that often, it's not an easy thing to do. It sometimes is or will raise emotions of anger or sadness. And then what is the thing that they're then going to throw that back onto you because you're the thing or the person that's made them then self-reflect. And that's why I often say it's the people don't always want you to grow. Even the people who are close to you, or surprisingly, it's often the people who are close to you. So I think when you become successful is usually when you find out who true friends are. Because even if you think previously about times you've been successful, how daunting or how difficult is it sometimes to tell friends or family about it? And if you get those feelings, often it's probably a point or sometimes a point where you're outgrowing that group or outgrowing that friendship group. But I think probably the best piece of advice that I could give with friends and family is firstly try to be as good as or a better communicator. So what I mean by that is try and tell them your why. I think if you can really get across to them why you're doing something or the purpose of behind what you're doing or the thing that drives you, then that is really going to help. And this is going to come from a 10-minute sweat conversation, which is probably going to be quite difficult, a difficult conversation for you to have. But if you can deliver it in a way which they understand and it's on their level, then it's going to be a lot easier. But if you aren't going to tell them, then you need to show them. You need to show them who you are, what you can do, and what you are about. Because sometimes for people, seeing is believing. And if they see you go out and hit this huge feat of this ultra marathon that you put yourself through and you put this huge block of work and effort into, then sometimes that will wake people up. That'll show people how much something means to you. And if it means a lot to you, then it should mean a lot to them if they love and support you. And the fact that you're doing this from behind closed doors is, for me, just so fucking cool. The fact that you are doing the work in the dark, because one thing that often happens when people take on endurance events, and I see this often now with social media and things online, is that people love to tell people what they're doing. And that's because whenever you put a status up or whenever you tell a friend or a family member or why the social media is, you get this huge dopamine hit because you get the claps and the likes and the validation from the thing you said you're going to do. And then what often happens a few weeks down the line is that people tend to lose that because they've already got that dopamine, they've already got that reward really early on from just telling people what they're going to do. So the fact that you're showing up and you're doing this in the dark, you're doing this behind the scenes, you're doing it for reasons which are genuinely for you because you want to enjoy it or you want to go through the hair looker, I think says a lot about you. You're doing it for the right reasons, when I think a lot of people take on endurance events these days because they want the clout, they want the acceptance, or they want to show people rather than show themselves. So I think for me, Clara, communication would be a big one. And if you're not going to communicate, then show people who you are. So wishing you the best of luck with the ultra and everything that's to come with it, because I'm sure you will learn a lot. Question number 2. This one is from Ben, so must be a cool guy. And he is also from the Whirl. So fellow Ben from the Whirl here, followed you for a while now. Great to see how you're tapping into a solo podcast. Really enjoyed the first episodes, trying not to listen to them all in one sitting and avoid toxic productivity. Something I was thinking about whilst listening to you was, do you have an opinion on when is most useful time to listen to a podcast in terms of how much you actually absorb? As trying to reduce the amount of content I listen to whilst doing mundane tasks can be difficult as someone who works from home. So I think the short answer to this is there isn't a universal best time for most people. However, if we go off what general science says in terms of, absorbing information and learning, usually mid-morning between 9 and 12 for most people is a good time to do heavy learning. So it also depends on what type of podcast you're listening to. If you listen to some, a couple of dudes just shooting the shit and having some social conversation, you could probably just switch that on whenever you like. If it's something which is a bit more heavy in terms of education content and things that you really need to think about or thought-provoking information, then 9 to 12, and then sometimes late afternoon between 4 to 6 is usually optimal times. The worst times are usually kind of between 1 and 3. Sometimes after you've had lunch, food's digestion, you maybe feel a little bit lethargic. So sort of deep study is never advised within those periods. But I just say do it whenever you feel like doing it, dude. I mean, for me personally, I like absorbing podcasts and information when I'm on my zone 2 runs. It's at a time where I'm obviously not busting my balls on a run. It's not interval training. I can essentially just do 2 things at the same time. I can get my good run in. I've got that optic flow from the change in environment from going for a run, which differs to when I'm on a treadmill. So I think when I'm outside running, absorbing the information through that different change in the environment really helps me. And I would say also only have a few sources of information. I think the stat is that most people only listen to 3 podcasts, which is probably a good rule of thumb. I think we're in an age where people like to mentally masturbate over how much information they're consuming and then take little action from it. So I think having a couple of good sources of information, i.e., the Unhinged Curiosity podcast, is usually a good place to start. So I just continue to listen to where you're currently listening, dude, and don't try and overload yourself. Try and take in information and then action it. Like, even when it comes to books, I've read the same book 3 times, which is Essentialism. I've spoken about that before, because I can action it. I like to read something which is relevant to me and is a reminder to me to maybe implement new things, or even try and eliminate some things from my life which are probably taking up too much time or too much space in my life. And I think a lot of us could probably do with reflecting on what they need to get rid of to save more time and energy. So yeah, in terms of listening to podcasts, dude, I would say 1, whenever you can; 2, when you enjoy; and 3, either early morning or later on in the afternoon or evening is probably the best bet. So hopefully that helps anyway, Ben. Question number 3 is best 10-minute reset when overwhelm hits. What are your current go-tos? So with overwhelm, even as recently as last weekend, have felt a little bit overwhelmed recently, just because there's been a lot going on since getting back from Australia. And usually when I come back to the UK, there's quite a lot of things to do, see friends, see family. But this time there's been an abundance of things that I've been attending to, and my energy and attention has been pulled towards. So obviously launching this new podcast was a big thing. It's been many months in the works. And then with the My Coach app, the version 3.0 is coming out very soon. We spent a large amount of money on development and new features and plugins and tracking and Strava. Then we had the gym opening, or I had the gym opening of my first gym last weekend, Bodytech Wrexham. So it's a lot of late nights and early mornings spent there, and I'm a guy and a creature of habit and routine, so that pulling me away from that was quite difficult. And then we are going to launch something new in the next week or 2, which you'll probably see come to fruition on social media. I'll tell you more about in next week's episodes. But there's just been a lot of things going on at the moment, and I felt quite overwhelmed with things on top of all the travel that I've been doing. And the reason that we often get overwhelmed is because of our central nervous system. So there's an element of protection that kicks in with overwhelm, because our central nervous system only has a certain capacity for stress. And when that is taken further, that's when we feel overwhelmed. So if we often look at, I've spoken about before, HRV in terms of devices, whether it's a Garmin or a Whoop, you'll often see changes in HRV, not just from physical fatigue, but also from, emotional or work-related stress. So HRV is sometimes a good indicator. Mine at the moment is actually sitting at 45, which is a nice change for once. It means that obviously doing the things around recovery and relaxation that are going to put me in a good space. So it's basically looking at your ability to be able to take on more stress and fatigue and be able to deal with it. And if you can't, then that's generally when we start to get overwhelmed. Now, I think the big thing that's helped me, and it's something I've probably not spoke about a whole lot yet because I'm saving it for a conversation that I'm going to have with a really cool guy in Australia. But I believe that my faith has really helped eliminate more stress and overwhelm. Generally because believing that it's not going to last forever. I know that this is something that's going to, it's there for a reason, and at some point it's going to be gone. I think when you're in a place where you're stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, you are super present and just thinking about it constantly, but knowing that that feeling isn't going to last forever and it will be gone is a massive help when in that position, because you're taking yourself out of the equation and you're gaining some perspective with it, that knowing that the feeling isn't always going to be there. But what I usually do starts with my morning routine. And that's because quite often, if you're someone who is or gets the feelings of anxiety or overwhelm, sometimes it's usually because you're starting the day in the red. So how do we get ourselves from the red to the green? And for me, that's a really short routine. It doesn't need to be super long, and I've spoke about this before. So this could be squeezed into 10 minutes, but generally I'll read for usually 15 minutes. If you want to just read something for 5 minutes, that's going to help absorb something early in the morning. I think something like the Daily Stoic or some kind of manifestation book is going to help just put something positive between your eyes first thing. And then I'll do a 5-minute breath work routine, which I'll again try and link in the description below. That really helps me just sort of calm the central nervous system and get into a good place. And then the third thing I'll do will be to journal. Just journal how I'm feeling, what's been going on, the things I maybe need to do for that day. Just anything that comes to mind, getting it down on paper is really important for me. It helps me feel less stressed once I've physically taken it from my head and onto paper, especially when I'm thinking about maybe whatever the problem is that's leading me to feel overwhelmed. Because like I said last week, the problem is the problem. It's already occurred, but only we have the ability to bring it into today and into tomorrow. And you are the one that carries that weight. So we're not supposed to take on more stress, but we can handle it in certain ways by putting in those things that are going to help us stay within the green. So that'd be kind of my 10-minute 3-step process to helping with overwhelm. It won't always completely get rid of it. I think accepting sometimes that you're in that position and then thinking about how can I overcome it or how can I move further into the green is a nice way to kind of lead on. Question number 4, how do you detach identity from outcomes without losing ambition? Great question. So, do you know what's hard is making yourself believe something. It's difficult for me to write out in my brain, like, today is going to be a good day. And then it's another thing for me to believe it. But it's super easy for me to write it. And again, this comes back to what I've just been speaking about with journaling. I think if you start to write something down on a piece of paper, what it does straight away is you can't do anything else. Your mind and your brain immediately goes to the pen and the paper that you're writing with. And when you start to see it and feel it, you start to become it because you are physically writing something down on a piece of paper. I know that I got anybody who listened to the first couple of episodes, I got you guys to do an exercise where you wrote down your name on a piece of paper and you held it up in front of you. So anybody who hasn't done that exercise yet, go back to episode 1. Really important exercise. It's going to help with self-belief, but it will really help with identity as well. And that's what makes it easier. So firstly, writing down who you are, what makes you you, and how great you are is going to help establish identity in a positive way. Because it's very easy for our brains to overtake and us lean into negativity bias and us think about all the things that are wrong in life or that are bad about us. But we can change that focus quite easily by writing down the things that are really great about you. Then next, what I would do is write down what you were going to achieve and why. See, because now what this does is it detaches the two straight away, because your identity is not based on what you achieve in the future. You're writing down what you want to achieve and you're writing down who you are. So straight away we detach those two things. Because it's important to ask yourself the question of, are you liked for who you are or what you do? And do you want to be liked for who you are or what you do? It's a question that I've asked myself a couple of times this year, and I think it's very easy, especially in the social media space, or when you attach your identity to work or accolades and achievements, to think that you are loved or liked for what you do and not who you are. So I think really thinking deeply on that question and then just writing down what comes to mind is another way for you to detach identity from outcomes, because I think we all want to be loved for who we are. I think when you lose that is when you can really find yourself with those thoughts of feeling lonely, because when you are no longer loved for who you are, you start to sometimes become a character of the positive reinforcement you get from achievements, and you start to lose yourself. So I think really trying to drill at the two things and separate those two things is going to help you detach. So yeah, really important. And I think the other thing that you can do is judge your process on adherence. So what I mean by that is there's outcome metrics. So if we're going to, again, attach this to social media or your job or to sales, it'd be in the form of views or signups or money made. And then process metrics would be, did you execute on the inputs that cause the improvements? And this is a really, really easy way to do that. Instead of worrying about the likes on or sales, you take great pride in just constantly showing up day to day, taking those repetitive actions, and what you're learning from completing those over and over again. So what I do is probably define 3 to 5 of those processes or habits that you want to lean into every day, and know will take you closer to your goals. And then I would just check the adherence over a week, and then maybe check the results over a month, and just do a mini check-in with yourself weekly or monthly to make sure that the things that you're doing are taking you closer to your goals. And I think that's what can then help still keep that ambition there. Like we said, again, with detaching identity from outcomes. So yeah, hopefully that one was helpful. And it's something that I have to remind myself of pretty frequently. Number 5. Ben, one story about opportunities dressed as pain that changed your life. What did you do differently after? Well, we got some deep thinkers in the listeners here, which is nice. One story about opportunities dressed as pain. Probably the most painful thing for me and for most people. It doesn't matter what I've done or been through with training or achievements or records or endurance events. I don't think the pain of breakups ever gets any easier, and it's something that you can never be prepared for. I take any endurance event or broken bone or cut or graze over a breakup any day. And someone actually said to me when I was in Australia, I'm never sad to see or hear about a breakup. And when he first said that to me, I was like, what the fuck is he talking about? I just didn't understand the logic behind it. But as time's gone on, I started to think more and more about it. And I think I've started to understand maybe what the gentleman who said to me was referring to. Because I think at the time you think it's the end of the world. You think your whole world's coming crashing down on you when the end of a relationship happens. Because again, relating to the previous question, we attach our identity sometimes to our partner or to people. But it's not until something ends that we really get to reflect on yourself and your own identity, and also all the great things that you've probably learned or overcome or will take with you from the rest of your life from that relationship in terms of experiences and memories. So what did I learn? What did I take away? What did I give? How can I be better? And what's next? I think are the things that I started to reflect on whenever a relationship has ended. And it started to change my life, because I don't believe there is one person for you out there. There is, billions and billions and billions of people out there in the world who will probably be a good fit for you. So I think removing that thought process that there's only one individual for you is really helpful when the end of a relationship comes. And also then not to tarnish the whole relationship with a brush which ended it, I think is a really important thing. Because when you reflect on a relationship as a whole, whether it is a couple of months or a couple of years, there's tons and tons of cherished memories, learnings, experiences, happiness and love from within there that I think some people use pain and anger to just kind of wash over or wash away, because it's too difficult for them to reflect on it and really review that period as anything but negative, because it helps them kind of, right, I'm going to shut that away, I'll lock it away, the door's closed, and I don't have to visit it ever again. Whereas there's so many memories that you get to take with you for the rest of your life, and also learnings about yourself. I think if you are willing to take the finger of blame and point it in internally, it helps you then move forward and take those learnings into the next thing or onto the next person that you can help and serve and be happier with. So I think I now see things as nothing is forever apart from the memories. The memories are the only things that you can take with you forever. Nothing is supposed to last forever. That's what makes them so special, is that everything has to come to an end, whether that's through a breakup or death or the closing of the chapter in some way. I think that the end of something is what makes things so beautiful. And that is one of the things I think I now view differently after being through painful scenarios that opportunities that address this pain. And it's usually the most painful ones that have the biggest learning. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Question number 6 is from Liam. What advice would you give to 16-year-old Benji? What advice would I give to 16-year-old Benji? Immediately, I'd probably say, Ben, be kinder to yourself and fear less. I think because we go through life worried about what other people think, we don't actually go through life thinking or being worried about what other people think. We really worry about what we think about us, because nobody else is really cares or is really worried about what you look like or what you're doing or thinking about you too often. It's usually just your own internal dialogue that creates that scenario. We're really worried about what you think about you. So I think if you feel less about the opinion of others, or feel less even about the opinion that you create in your own head, it will be a lot better. And that's what I'd tell Benji, who's 16 years old right now. And secondly, the fear is usually just the fear about what you don't know. And you don't know what you don't know. So the real trick is to be brave, because usually on the other side of the unknown is something great, or to the next chapter. And only you have the ability to wrap the unknown in a layer of fear. I think accepting that you can't control everything, or there's going to be things in life that you don't know, is one of the ways that you do that. But 99% of the time, we attach a false narrative to the future or to the unknown, because the future is the future and we know nothing about it really. So it's only the unknown that scares us. So I'd say to Ben, fear less, and be a bit kinder to yourself. I think we could all do with being a little bit kinder to ourselves. I think we could probably all do with treating ourselves like we treat other people rather than the other way around. Because I think often, even with the example of when other people are sick or ill, we're quite quickly to offer them advice to, whether it be take a pill or to go and see a doctor. That advice never extends to ourselves. It's just a case of, I'll be okay. We'll be all right. I'll just crack on. I'll still go to the gym. I'll still get to work. And we don't put the same protocols in place that we would potentially offer to other people, because, and I do this myself very often, especially, I'm probably one of the biggest perpetrators of it in terms of offering advice on this podcast that I probably need to take myself, which is why I also selfishly created the podcast, because it was something that I needed to reflect on. It was an opportunity for me to explore self-development and being content in different ways, and take my own advice a little bit more seriously. So yeah, 16-year-old Benji, be kinder to yourself and fear less, if you listen to this. Next question. This is number 7. What's the healthy version of, quote unquote, the masculine edge? So I think the things that immediately jump out to me are direction and purpose. This is something for me in real dark periods of my life where I went through periods of even thinking about taking my own life and being in those real dark, horrible periods. The two things that really, I guess, made those scenarios more potent and force men to take their own life is when, 1, they lack purpose, and 2, they feel like they're a burden. So I think having direction, having discipline, and having depth are 3 big things to the masculine edge, because I think they help create one, purpose, like we've been speaking about. Two, creates boundaries, which are really important. And boundaries are different to strategy. To keeping your boundaries and be willing to uphold them, and then having an emotional range. I think this is a difficult one, because when we think about the masculine edge, being emotional and being vulnerable are two different things. I think the world definitely now wants men to be vulnerable but not emotional. And I think maybe for some right reasons. I think you've got to have control of your emotions and you need to be emotionally disciplined, but starting to be vulnerable and have those difficult conversations is definitely a masculine thing to do. Other things I think lead into the masculine edge and help create that are being calm under pressure, and protecting your standards. I think often when other people come into our lives, whether it be a partner or whether that be a friendship, we allow our standards to drop. I think protecting those is something that we need to do as men, protecting those standards and upholding those standards over time. And the other thing is being kind, not nice. And I think they're the backbones to embracing the masculine edge. And when I say being kind and not nice, the easiest scenario for me to explain this would be if you were in a restaurant with a friend and they've maybe got a bit of, you're in Five Guys and you've got a bit of burger sauce on the side of your face. Being nice would be not telling them that it's there because you don't want to embarrass them. Being kind would be to tell them, hey dude, you got a bit of sauce on your face there. And maybe that's little bit more difficult when you're with a chick that you're on a date with. But being kind is telling them the uncomfortable truth sometimes, which is then going to help them. So there for me are the things that I think straight away about the masculine edge, and leaning into those things will help you get closer to it. So yeah. Question number 8. What's going on with the hair and mustache? As one of my friends has just recently labeled me in Australia on a podcast I just done with him recently, he labeled me as the Scouse cowboy. One, I'm actually not Scouse, not from Liverpool. And two, I do have a cowboy hat now in Australia, but I think owning a Stenson hat is far from being a cowboy. But I guess I actually just felt I needed a little bit of a change. I'd been going to the barber and having the same skin fade for 2 or 3 years. I'd go weekly, so it now actually saves me a little bit of money. And two, I think when I was sort of moving into this next chapter of my life, or whenever you go to a new place, I guess it allows you to reinvent yourself as well. So there's probably going to be a point, especially based on my dad's genetics and appearance, I may not be able to hold on to this hair for much longer. So I'm going to embrace it and make as much of it as I can. But on a serious note, I think sometimes when you're in certain periods of your life, when things get busy or when you're going through changes, you let yourself go a little bit. And one of the great things about, I think, being happy or when you're in those stress places is self-care is actually a really big step towards, I think, looking after yourself. I think whenever you're in places, doing something physical lies directly upstream from your psychological and mental health. So looking after yourself, going for the run, going for the walk, doing the thing, going and spend a little bit of money on yourself or pampering yourself or a new haircut or a change in wardrobe definitely helps for you to feel better, and then build that confidence then to do something different. So yeah, the hair and mustache is here to stay for a while. So number 9, the biggest mistake lifters make when they start running and you're fix. So something to do with fitness. I think probably people, I'll just relate this to my own experiences and experiences that I've had with hundreds of clients, is that you tend to run too much or run too much too soon. It's a process where you have to scale volume slowly over time, especially if you're coming from a background where you're going to be super tight and you have spent a lot of time lifting and you're probably a little bit bigger than the average human being if you've been lifting for a while. So training volume or running volume specifically, you want to try and increase by about 10% every couple of weeks. So if you're at the moment doing a 5K once a week, you might only go up to 5.5K the next week. And if you're doing 10K, maybe move up to 11K the next week. And training or running volume shouldn't really increase too much quicker than that, especially as a newer runner. And then on top of that, usually people run too fast when they start running. And it's very difficult for people who go from lifting to running to really understand that, because everything that you do is usually a pretty high intensity or a high velocity when you're training. So starting to pull back and realize that the majority or 90% of your running training should be done at zone 2 is quite a difficult concept to understand. And when you actually do start to understand it, it becomes even more frustrating that you have to run so slow to be in zone 2 when you first start at that conversational pace. I think the third thing that I definitely forgot is that I'm a big lump. So that extra weight that goes through the body whenever I'm running, and all that weight going through one foot, every time I'm going through cadence, and every time I'm taking a step, and every time I'm going through my stride, it's something that you've got to be wary of. So that means that you have to do probably a little bit more prehab work than a dude who's like 160-pound runner piss wet through. So you need to be bulletproof in your body regularly as someone who's coming from a lifting background. Coming into a running background would probably be my biggest advice. Okay, another fitness question just leading on from that is number 10. One change that moved your Hyrox engine the most in 6 weeks. Okay, so I know, especially for people in Australia, there's a couple of events coming up with Perth and I think Melbourne, and the UK Hyrox season is kicking off very soon as well. So it's probably not too far from being 6 weeks away. But again, it's going to be leaning into running is going to be the biggest bang for your buck. So running more zone 2, and specifically actually putting in more brickwork. And I'd say when it comes to brickwork, probably doing some bike. So whether that be like a 30-minute bike into a 30-minute run is really useful, because the one thing that we're trying to do when it comes to Hyrox is we're trying to bulletproof those legs. We are trying to turn them into lead pipes so they can deal with high amounts of training volume and a lot of lactic acid buildup. And it's pretty similar when you're doing maybe some hard bike efforts for 30 minutes, then going into a 30-minute run, you're running on those fatigued legs, which again, you're going to be doing a lot of in Hyrox. And the other thing I would say is with station work is get more dialed in with technique. I've done a full YouTube video on running through technique for all the stations. You could shave seconds off and save yourself a lot of time, energy, and efficiency just by getting better at the station works. That doesn't necessarily mean coming up improving your fitness or your muscular endurance on those stations. It can just become more effective at completing the sled or the burpee. So it's the technique that goes into it where you can save yourself a lot of time. So I guess the way that I would look at that is, or the way that people often look at it, is that they step over the pounds to pick up the pennies. They're doing a lot of work, but you could really be more effective and efficient by just improving technique and spending a little bit of time on technique. But sometimes it's not the sexy stuff that people want to spend their time doing. They want to be in the dungeon, in the pain cave, showing that off and getting a sweat on. So yeah, I'd say brickwork and technique. Over the next 6 weeks, if you need to improve, looking at including some of that in training and doing some sessions which are purely focused on technique. Okay, number 11. What gets you from fit to race ready in the last 10 days? So this is a follow-on from the Hyrox question again. The way that I always look at whenever you've got a training block, so say, for example, you've done the 6 or the 12-week training block, like we've just been speaking about, you've included the brickwork, you've done the technique stuff, you're now getting into that last 10 to 7 days and you're looking at tapering. What you've essentially been doing over that 6 or 12-week period is you're building a battery, you're building a base. And the goal is to make that battery as big and as powerful as possible so that when we unleash it, it lasts for a long time, but it also gives you a lot of power. And then what we're doing that last 7 to 10 days is we're trying to charge that battery as much as possible. So it's often mentally difficult for people to do a taper week because they've been so used to just smacking their own arse for 12 weeks in the gym, and they've become used to that level of pain and hard work and effort. And now having to pull back from that creates a little bit of conflict in their own head because the body's not feeling that anymore. And the one thing that you've got to try and think about as a mental visual cue is that you have this battery that you've built. And if you're for the last 7 to 10 days going to continue to burn that out and not allow it to charge, you've essentially built something that you can never really unleash. It never has the full potential there because you're never allowing it to charge. It would just be the same as allowing your iPhone to charge to 50% every day and then just taking it off. You need to allow that 7 to 10 day period to taper, bring down the training volume, and really also lean into recovery protocol, because you can only train as well as you can recover, and you can only compete as hard as you can train. So that last 7 to 10 days, we need to be looking at the tools that really complement your recovery in terms of hot and cold, maybe a little bit of mobility work, pulling back on the training volume, probably by 50%, but still keeping the intensity in there, because you want to feel like when you come to a race day that you are like a horse ready to go out the gates. So that intensity needs to stay in there. And then maybe even looking at massage or things that are going to keep you as least stressed as possible would be my personal recommendations. But obviously at the same time, people have jobs, people have commitments. So just do what you can in that 7 to 10 day period to be as recovered as possible and stress-free as possible would be my protocol for that 10-day period, and allow yourself to come away from the attachment that things have to be difficult and hard. Because I think the common thing as somebody who's always looking to self-develop and get better is that we start to associate being successful with pain. And in that last 7 to 10 days, you've got to really detach from that. You've got to detach that the more pain you cause, the more successful you're going to be, because it's actually in reverse when it comes to that last 7 to 10 days. So yeah, view yourself as a battery. Okay, question number 12. How do you rebuild momentum in a new environment fast? Well, okay, how do you build momentum in a new environment fast? I'll probably just lean into, again, my time, because I'm spending a lot of time between the UK and Australia. One thing that I have to be able to do is migrate back into that time zone fairly quickly and find the habits fairly quickly that make me feel good and also make me productive. So I will try and think about things that anchor me into that time zone and allow my circadian rhythm to get back to a good place. And the way that I usually break these down are kind of into 3 different things. So training for me straight away helps me kind of ground myself into that time zone and into that new environment. I think getting a good sweat, it doesn't need to be a really intense session. It could just be, 20 to 30 minutes. Joe Rogan often talks about this, about getting a quick session in or a run. Can really help you get that endorphin release. And then also if you need to get to sleep at a certain time, it's going to help sort of tire you out a little bit and feel a little bit of fatigue, but not too much, because you've probably done quite a lot of travel to get to the place where you need to be. I will then work out what my work blocks are going to look like for the next few days, and not overload my plate. I think you need to pull things onto your plate, not allow things to be pushed onto your plate. And then the third thing is something as simple as walking. I think getting out and exploring the new environment that you are in is great for the brain. It's great for yourself. It's great to get your bearings. I think that helps to build momentum into that new environment. I think the other thing to do is, and you've got to be cautious about doing this, and this is one of the things I did when I got to Australia the first time, because I traveled there on my own, is I think you need to try and walk into one new room at least weekly. And that one new room, it doesn't mean to be a physical room, but for me, it was, I went to a brand new gym. I went to a run club. I went to I guess you call it a networking event. It was just a big dinner with people. And I think walking into one new room or opening yourself up to meeting one new person in a new environment, especially somebody who's maybe local to that environment, definitely helps to ground you in that place, because they're going to help you meet other people that are around there. And then straight away you start to integrate into groups, because essentially most of us want to be part of the in-group. So by creating that social element, by forcing yourself into one new room each week and not allowing it to overwhelm you, I think is a good way for you to start to anchor yourself into those new environments really quickly. And it also helps to build those new relationships with new friends and new people. I think if you can't do that and it's too daunting, I think going into places like coffee shops or supermarkets and having those micro conversations with local people is a really great way to start building your own confidence in a new place. Because probably one thing you're going to lack when you go to a new environment is that self-belief and that self-confidence, because you're in the unknown. So starting to build self-confidence through those micro conversations, if you don't have the confidence to be going out into these events, is a great way for you to do that. And for me, this worked out really well in Australia. For me, I preferred jumping the deep end and meeting those new people. And the first couple of people I met and bumped into, I now have a house with in Australia. So you just never know what's going to come from those conversations. I think that's the beautiful thing about it, is go and show up at the places, even when you really don't want to. Even more so if you don't want to, because you never know what's going to come from those conversations or those relationships. So number 13. So I've just got it's not really a question, it just says posting. So I'm guessing the listener is talking about posting on social media. And I'm going to put my own spin on this, because I guess it's the same thing for most people, is that they're probably worried about putting out posts on social media, or, whether that be posting or whether that be speaking. I think if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, you have to do what you need to do, not what you want to do. And often what you want to achieve is just on the other side of cringe. And we are emotional beings, and you won't always have in mind today what's best for you tomorrow. So I think starting to understand that concept and be self-aware of that is going to be really useful for making decisions, like just putting the post out, like just creating the post. Because the one thing that you're going to have to get used to doing is doing it mad, sad, and tired, and doing it anyway. This was really driven home to me when I first started to record content in the gym. I was in the gym one day and there's quite a few people around, and we were filming, I think, like an exercise tutorial. I had to do some sort of speaking anyway, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I feel like such a tit, and I would rather be anywhere than here. I was thinking about what other people were thinking about me and thinking about getting things wrong. And then my friend said to me, do you think Joe Wicks is thinking about that other people are thinking about him and not doing it? And the reality was, he probably was maybe thinking about the other people that were thinking about him, but he did it anyway. And I think having some perspective like that, or thinking about people that you want to be like and what would they do in this situation, is really useful. And thinking about, I said this in the last podcast, the you of tomorrow. I think, how can you give yourself, your future self, a fist bump? And the way that you do that is by doing the things that you need to do, not that you want to do. So I think the more people that even just use social media, especially early on, as a practice arena, because when nobody's watching is the time that you can fuck up most. So just going in there and getting things wrong, or using it, and I use TikTok this way, using it as an arena just to post videos and just to do talking videos. And I use it as a tool just to practice my public speaking. It takes a lot of pressure off. I think when you think everything has to be perfect is when you stop posting, you stop doing the thing. Because anybody who's probably successful and that you look up to is just fucked up a million times and not stopped and carried on going. And that's not an easy thing to do, but the only way you can do it is by not stopping. So yeah, post, because probably everything that you want to achieve from that post is just on the other side of being cringe. So I'd say be more cringy. Okay, so you've got a couple more questions. So thanks for posting these in, by the way, guys. Some of these questions are great. It's always nice to know that I have some deep thinking listeners and also a nice variety of questions as well. Number 14. Ben, a belief you held 2 years ago that you no longer believe, and what changed that? Belief you held 2 years ago that you no longer believe, and what changed that? I think probably just reverting back, I'd probably just will fall back on the question I answered before in regards to opportunities that present themselves in pain. I would say that when it comes to things that end, the only thing that we can take with us in our life are memories, and nothing is supposed to last forever. I think I was always under the illusion, and that's why I think I'm not very good at goodbyes. I always felt that things would always just go on and carry on. There wouldn't be an ending to things. And now leaning into the fact that all chapters come to a close. Not all people are supposed to be in your life forever. There's some people who are in your life, for seasons, for years, and forever. And that is absolutely fine. I think once you start to also appreciate the ending of stuff, it makes you appreciate time more, that you realize that, everything is finite. And that then led me over the past couple of years probably to think about death a little bit more. I know to some people that sometimes can sound morbid, but I think people who think about death more also appreciate life more. Again, because time is finite, and as you get older, it does start to pass more quickly. So it started to make me, one, probably be more present, and two, just to start to take more action, because the mistakes or the embarrassment or the problems, they don't actually last that long, and life isn't that long. So I need to try and put things into my mind that are going to put me into a better place, because I think probably two of the most underrated things is a fit body and a calm mind. So if I can lean into doing those two things, and when things do come to an end, be prepared for it and accept it. I think that's what's changed most over the last 2 years, and that sometimes takes you going through something to understand that, and being equipped to deal with those things. And that's why I appreciate some of those opportunities masked in pain, because that's what has led for me to be able to be in this headspace where I am now and be a lot kinder to myself when those things happen. But yeah, good question. Question number 15. One hill you'll die on in fitness. One hill I'll die on in fitness. I'd say biceps are the most important muscle group in every way. that's the only thing I'd probably say about that. I don't have many hills I die on. I think one of the things that, unpopular opinion, but which is a really useful thing when you're viewing other people, is that people who change their opinion as they go through life are valuable. I think it shows growth. If you are willing to change your perspective and change your opinion because you are learning and self-developing as you go along, that's a pretty useful tool. Only, idiots and ideologues will pass judgment on people or throw shit on people because they've changed their opinion. So yeah, I don't have a lot of hills that I die on, apart from biceps, the most important muscle group. So, question number 16. Ben, a wrong take that you have about productivity. A wrong take I have about productivity. I'm guessing this is maybe something that I've had a wrong take on about. One of those is probably to do more. You don't always need to do more, but I think most people need to do less planning and more shipping. So what I mean by that is, if you're spending probably more than 30 minutes, especially 30 minutes per day, planning stuff, you need to do less of that and take more action. I think you can spend so much time just in just in sketching out what your day is going to look like or what your week's going to look like rather than starting to fill it in. So I think you need to start to look at your ship cadence, i.e., even if I was going to sort of relay this back to posting again, it would be, what's your cadence in terms of churning out reels or posts or podcasts or emails or YouTube videos. And then after you've shipped would be to look at the feedback loop, look at the maybe the metrics, what worked, what didn't work, and then repeat. So yeah, I think the anti-overthinking alarm has got to kick in at some point if you're spending more than 30 minutes a day planning, because I think that ruins your productivity. I think a wrong take that you have about productivity. I think multitasking, for some people, they think it is a great strength, but I think monotasking is where it's at. I think having more depth rather than more depth rather than width is definitely the play when it comes to this, and is a superpower, because you can get so caught up in switching from task to task that you lose your attention and focus. And if you can apply yourself, 20 to 40% more to one task rather than switching between multiple, your productivity will be a lot higher. And this is something that I'm still trying to do. I'm still one of those people who in life attention's trying to be pulled from pillar to post, and starting to understand and eliminate things in life that are going to give me time back is a big useful thing. I think I've mentioned it before. There's a little device called a brick. I found that really useful. So what you do with it, again, for those who haven't heard me talk about this before, it's a small device you can leave anywhere in your house. You want to try and put it as far away from you as possible. You tap your phone on it. It takes all the social media apps off your phone. So the only thing that you basically use your phone for is being a phone again. A little bit like when the good old days, you used to have your Nokia 3310, essentially just a phone. So those distractions of notifications or social media apps aren't there, which I think if you were probably to look at your phone usage would be the biggest part of most people's time. So yeah, monotasking and more shipping over planning would be my biggest take homes. Okay, last question. I think it's number 18. If you could gift every listener one practice for 30 days, what is it and why? One practice for 30 days, what would it be? I'm going to lean back into something that I've already said on this podcast, but it has been a thing that I used to see as probably a bit of woo-woo bullshit, and that was journaling. But I'm going to take this a step further and talk also about manifestation, and that has probably been one of the most powerful things that I've implemented over, especially the last 3 to 6 months with inside journaling, because I think, like I spoke about in the previous podcast, your brain doesn't know the difference between what you are telling it has and what it doesn't. So if you're continuously telling your mind that it has such and such a thing, it might be more money, it might be the car, it might be the relationship, it might be the opportunity. When you start to do that, you start to program your being into being in environments, making decisions, speaking to people in a way that aligns you with that opportunity or with that goal or with that next thing that you want, and you start to live in line with that. The same as people who often tell them things, negative things and bad things that are going to happen, and wonder why bad things continue to happen. You've really got to think about the way that you're talking to yourself and then the way that you manifest things. It's not because the universe or God has given you these things on a plate. It is because you are programming your brain to align with purpose, and you start to also really value those things, but also value yourself and know that you're worthy of having these things. Because I think often you think you're not ready to accept them, or you're not worthy to accept them, or you haven't done enough yet, or you haven't put the work in, or you'll never be ready. And the truth is, you probably will never be ready until you start to accept that you are. And I think if I could give all of my listeners one challenge for the next 30 days, no, I'm actually going to give you this challenge for the next 30 days. I want you to from when this podcast is out, which might even be the start of September, use September as a month to just journal. And it doesn't have to be in line with anything in particular, but just journaling what comes to mind and manifesting things that you want or things that you feel, and then starting to lean into those. And then I would like people to write into ben@unhingedcuriosity.com after you've done those 30 days and tell me what you've learned, or tell me how you feel, or tell me if it's changed your life, or tell me if, do you know what, Ben, it was just bullshit and it didn't work for me. But I think if I could give you guys one thing for the next 30 days, it'll be a challenge to journal. It doesn't have to be, you have to buy a journal which is laid out with prompts and tips. It could just be a notebook or a pad that you have at home. Anything that you feel comfortable writing in that you can leave with your morning coffee or wherever is optimal for you to make it a good habit to fill in. And at first, it'll probably feel uncomfortable. At first, you won't know what to write, but just write anything, write something, and it'll start to become a good habit that I promise you will lead to better things. So yeah, that is our first Q&A of Unhinged Curiosity. Hopefully that was useful and helpful. Again, I think the thing that I took away from this is just how intelligent you guys are and how great listeners you've been to the previous episodes, because they all fall in line with the underbelly of this podcast, which is how do we balance self-development versus being content. And it's a journey that we're on together. And hopefully I can continue to be a voice that's in your corner as we go through this journey together. But as always, please continue to subscribe with whichever avenue you are listening to the podcast, whether that be Apple, Spotify, YouTube, because it really does help me in bringing more to this podcast and also bringing in guests in the future. I know we just had our first 2 guest episodes, so hopefully you guys enjoyed those. I have also aligned a couple of new guests which are going to be coming over the next couple of weeks, which is exciting. But most of all, just share it with somebody who maybe potentially needs to hear this week's episode, and continue to listen and enjoy. I'll see you in the next one.